With the invention and the adoption of the jet engine, there was a major breakthrough in aviation engineering in the middle of the 20th century. Scientists all around the world tinkered with all sorts of daring ideas, including the idea to make a fixed-wing aircraft capable of vertical takeoff and landing, which had been a dream of many engineers for quite a long time. This research was also backed by the military, as they were very interested in aircraft that could operate from a short runway and with minimal ground facilities. As such, VTOL aircraft could also be operated from carriers, and the British were the first ones to prove that it was, in fact, possible. In 1967, they started producing the Hawker Siddeley Harrier, a ground attack aircraft with VTOL capabilities. The Royal Air Force received a unique combat vehicle that could be quickly deployed abroad, and for a decade the Harrier was the only jump jet in the world. That is, until the Soviets introduced the Yak-38 in 1977. Soviet engineers started working on an aircraft with VTOL capabilities in as early as the second half of the 1950s. An experimental attack aircraft designated Yak-36 was finished in 1964, but failed to meet expectations as its two turbojets weren't powerful enough to allow for sustained takeoff with a full combat load. Due to a number of reasons, the team decided to build a new vehicle from scratch, instead of trying to improve the previous design, using all the experience accumulated during the development of the Yak-36. And it worked. Chief designer Alexander Yakovlev initially wanted to use the same power plant configuration as on the Harrier, with a single lift/cruise engine with vectoring nozzles. Using this configuration would allow for a higher maximum takeoff mass, but there wasn't a single engine in the Soviet Union that would fit the bill, not even in the works. That's why the team decided to adopt the approach suggested by Stanislav Mordovin, namely, to outfit the aircraft with 3 engines, with 2 smaller ones used purely for takeoff and landing, and the main lift and flight engine used during flight. The new plane was called Yak-36M, but the name was hardly accurate, as the only thing that it shared with its predecessor was its capability for vertical takeoff and landing. The Yak-36M made its maiden flight in September 1970, during which its test pilot, Valentin Mukhin, was able to fully hover. At the same time, tests showed that with the chosen design of power plant, it was still too difficult to balance the aircraft. It took Soviet engineers 2 more years to get to the point where the aircraft achieved all 3 milestones in a single flight: a vertical launch, transition to horizontal flight, and finally, a vertical landing. Progress was slow, but things went rather smoothly. Despite its unusual controls and the overall difficulty of piloting a VTOL aircraft, not a single prototype jet was lost during testing. Nevertheless, engineers were fully aware of the dangers of operating such a fickle aircraft and fitted it with a special automatic ejection system, which was absolutely the right thing to do. In 1977, the Yak-36M naval attack aircraft was accepted into service as Yak-38, also known as the Forger in the West. It was powered by 3 engines. 2 auxiliary jets, used purely for takeoff and landing, were fitted right behind the cockpit and were covered in level flight, while the main lift and flight engine with vectored thrust nozzles was mounted in the rear. The jet was armed with a 23mm GSH-23 gun, and it could carry bombs, R-60 air-to-air missiles, as well as several types of rockets, with a maximum bomb load of 2,000 kilograms. When it came to its flying performance, the Forger flew pretty much like a typical subsonic aircraft, just without a radar. But as these planes made it into actual service, it quickly became apparent that there were a lot of kinks to iron out. Due to the way its propulsion system was set up, the plane was practically unfit for use in high temperatures, and the only way to solve this problem was to redo some parts, like air inlets, basically from scratch. Furthermore, pilots had a hard time getting to grips with operating a jump jet, as it required a completely new set of skills and technical knowledge, with many first flights resulting in crashes. Thankfully, as the plane was fitted with an effective automatic ejection system, only a few of those resulted in the loss of human life. The year 1980 was the most eventful year in the history of the aircraft. As the Soviet-Afghan War broke out, 4 Yak-38s were transported to Afghanistan as a part of Operation Rhomb, where Soviet pilots made more than 100 flights to test its combat capabilities. Eventually, Yak-38s were withdrawn due to a number of accidents and smaller problems. In 1985, the Navy received a new, improved variant of the aircraft, the Yak-38M. The aircraft was finally fitted with a radar and better engines, and there were a myriad of smaller changes that made this Yak considerably more reliable. Both variants of this attack aircraft remained in service up until 2004, even though most of them were scrapped much earlier, in the mid-1990s. Finally, in any discussion involving the Yak-38, we simply have to mention its spiritual successor, at least in some sense, the Yak-141. This multi-role carrier-based fighter was originally developed as a supersonic VTOL fighter aircraft and inherited some of the Yak-38 DNA. All the experience accumulated during the development of the Yak-38 definitely came in handy. The Yak-141 turned out to be a very successful design that was able to set around a dozen records. Unfortunately, it never made it to actual full-scale production, as both the political and economical situation began to deteriorate. The original Yak-38 was a true breakthrough vehicle for Soviet naval aviation. Yes, its combat capabilities were not as good as what you would have had with the Harrier, but all that effort of countless engineers was not for naught. The aircraft became an important tool in the arsenal of the Navy. Soviet designers were eager to work on even more advanced VTOL aircraft that could massively improve the combat potential of strike teams operating from heavy aircraft cruisers. However, those plans were not meant to be. The annihilation of the Soviet Union resulted in a shutdown of the program. Nevertheless, the Yak-38 is still available in War Thunder. In the Soviet tech tree, there are 2 variants of this aircraft, a premium standard model and the researchable Yak-38M. What do you think about this unusual strike aircraft? Maybe you're more of a Harrier enthusiast? Tell us in the comments below.